The train screamed into the station like a dying animal, its whistle tearing through the frozen air of the Wyoming territory. Thomas Garrett stood on the platform, his hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he'd done. He'd ordered a wife like cattle, paid for her passage with money he didn't have, and now she was here. The woman stepping off that train wasn't the strong farmhand he'd imagined from her carefully worded letters. She was small, pale, her dress threadbare against the bitter wind of 1885. His heart sank like a stone in dark water. He'd made a terrible mistake. But before he could even speak her name, the sky opened up with a fury that would trap them together in that desolate station. Two strangers bound by desperate choices, about to face the longest night of their lives. Before we begin, I invite you to join me on this journey. If this story moves you, hit that like button and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far our tale travels across this world. The wind had teeth. That's what Thomas Garrett thought as he stood on the platform of the Bitter Creek station, watching the Union Pacific locomotive drag itself through the gathering storm like a beast struggling against its chains. The cold bit through his wool coat, through the layers of flannel and cotton beneath, straight down to the bone. But it wasn't the Wyoming winter that made him shake. It was dread. He'd done something he couldn't undo. 4 months ago, in the desperate quiet of a failing ranch, he'd composed a letter. The words had come hard, each one feeling like a confession of failure. Rancher seeks capable woman for marriage. Must be strong, willing to work. Life will be hard but honest. He'd read it over a dozen times before sealing it, before sending it east to the matrimonial agency in Boston. He told himself it was practical, necessary. He needed help to save the ranch, and the territory was empty of unmarried women. It was business, nothing more. The letters that came back had surprised him. Mary Elizabeth Brennan wrote in a clear, steady hand. She described herself as healthy, hardworking, accustomed to difficulty. She didn't waste words on romance or flowery promises. She seemed sensible. That's what he told himself when he sent the money for her train fare. She seemed sensible. But the woman stepping down from the passenger car looked anything but sensible. She looked like a ghost. Mary Elizabeth Brennan was thin in a way that spoke of hunger, not natural build. Her dress, dark blue and carefully mended, hung loose on her frame. The collar was frayed, the cuffs worn nearly white from washing. Her face, pale as milk, held a sharp beauty that was almost painful to look at. High cheekbones, dark eyes too large for her face, lips pressed tight against the cold, or against disappointment. He couldn't tell which. She carried a single worn carpet bag, clutching it against her chest like a shield. When she looked at him, really looked at him, something flickered across her face. Recognition? No, something deeper. Something that looked dangerously close to hope. Thomas felt his stomach drop. "Mr. Garrett?" Her voice was softer than he'd expected, but steady, controlled. "Miss Brennan." He couldn't bring himself to call her Mary. Not yet. That would make it too real. "Mrs. Garrett?" she corrected gently, and there it was, the thing he'd been trying not to think about. They were married. He'd signed the papers the agency sent, had them witnessed by his neighbor Jacob Morrison, sent them back east. Legally, in the eyes of the law and the territory, this stranger was his wife. The conductor appeared behind her, dropping a small trunk onto the platform with a heavy thud. "That's all of it, ma'am. You folks best get inside. Storm's coming in bad. Worst I've seen building in 20 years. Thomas barely heard him. He was staring at the trunk, small, battered, held together with rope. Everything she owned in the world, he realized. Everything she'd brought to this new life fit in one small trunk and a carpet bag. What had he done to her? "We should go," Mary said, and he heard it then, the slight tremor beneath the controlled tone. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, based on nothing but letters and desperate hope. "The ranch is 15 miles north," Thomas said, forcing the words out. "We'll stay at the boarding house tonight, head out at first light when the road's clearer." But even as he spoke, the wind picked up with a howl that seemed to come from the earth itself. The first snowflakes weren't falling, they were flying, horizontal and sharp as glass. Mary pulled her thin shawl tighter. "Is it far? The boarding house?" "Just across the way." Thomas stopped. Across the small square of packed dirt that served as the town's center, he could see the boarding house, or rather, where the boarding house should be. The building was dark, completely dark. "Damnation," he muttered. "What is it?" "Mrs. Henderson, she runs the boarding house. She must have gone to stay with her daughter in town. Does that when bad weather's coming?" He should have thought of that. Should have sent word ahead. Should have planned better. Should have done 1,000 things differently. The station master emerged from his office, an old man named Crenshaw, who'd been working this platform since before Wyoming was even a territory. "You two best come inside. Can't go nowhere in this. Stage won't run, and you'd be fools to try for a wagon." "We'll wait it out," Thomas said. "Storm will pass." Crenshaw shook his head, his breath pluming white in the rapidly darkening air. "Not this one. Look at that sky, Garrett. That's a 3-day blow coming, maybe worse. I'm closing the office and heading home while I still can. You're welcome to shelter in the waiting room, but I can't stay." 3 days? Mary's voice was smaller now. Could be. Could be longer." Crenshaw was already moving, gathering his coat and hat, checking the stove in his office. "There's wood for the waiting room stove. Should last you through the night at least. Well's out back if you need water. I'd offer my place, but I got 6 kids and a wife who'll have my hide if I don't get home before this gets worse." He paused at the door, looking at them with something that might have been pity. "Congratulations on your marriage, by the way. Heard you'd sent for a bride. Hell of a way to start." Then he was gone, disappearing into the white curtain that had already begun to erase the world. Thomas and Mary stood on the platform, watching the storm devour everything. The boarding house vanished first, then the general store, then the church steeple. In less than 5 minutes, the world had shrunk to just the station platform and the swirling white beyond. "Inside us," Thomas said, picking up her trunk. It was lighter than he expected, which somehow made it worse. The waiting room was small and sparse. 2 wooden benches, a pot-bellied stove, a few faded posters advertising lands for sale in California and Oregon. A single window looked out onto what should have been the town square, but was now just an infinite white nothing. The room smelled of old smoke and loneliness. Thomas set down the trunk and turned to the stove. At least Crenshaw had left it prepared, kindling and logs stacked beside it, matches on the small shelf above. He busied himself with the fire, grateful for something to do with his hands, for an excuse not to look at her. Behind him, he heard Mary moving carefully around the small space, the rustle of her skirts, the soft placement of her carpet bag on one of the benches. He heard her trying not to make too much noise, trying not to take up too much space, trying, he realized, not to be a burden. The kindling caught, flames licking up around the larger logs. He adjusted the damper, watched the fire begin to build. The stove would warm the room quickly. That was something, at least. "Mr. Garrett." Her voice made him turn. She stood in the center of the small room, her hands clasped in front of her, her posture perfectly straight despite what must be exhaustion from days of travel. "I want to thank you for the opportunity, for choosing me." Choosing. The word hit him like a fist. He hadn't chosen her. He'd chosen an idea, a description in a letter, a solution to a problem. He'd chosen help for his failing ranch, an extra pair of hands, someone to cook and clean and work beside him. He hadn't chosen this fragile woman with her 2 large eyes and her small trunk of belongings. "You must be tired," he said instead. "It's a long journey from Boston." "I didn't come from Boston. The agency was there, but I came from Hartford, Connecticut." She said it like it mattered, like she needed him to know she wasn't misrepresenting herself. "I worked in a textile mill there. For 6 years." 6 years. She couldn't be more than 25, he thought, which meant she'd been working since she was 19, maybe younger. "The mill closed," she continued, and he heard the careful control in her voice, the way she was managing to tell him difficult things without asking for pity. "New machinery, they didn't need as many workers. I tried to find other work, but Hartford is full of women like me. Too many of us, not enough work." She paused, her fingers tightening where they were clasped. "When I saw the advertisement for the matrimonial agency, I thought it might be a chance. A different life." "It's different, all right," Thomas said, and immediately regretted the harshness in his tone. "I mean, the territory is nothing like Connecticut. Nothing like anything back east. It's hard out here. Harder than you can probably imagine. Something flashed in her eyes, anger, maybe, or hurt, but her voice remained steady. I can imagine quite a lot, Mr. Garrett. I've been hungry. I've been cold. I've worked 18-hour days in conditions that would make most men weep. I didn't come here expecting comfort. I came here expecting work and honesty and a chance to build something. That's what your letters promised. His letters. He thought about what he'd written, the careful words he'd chosen to describe his situation. A working ranch, good land, hard work, but rewarding. He'd made it sound almost appealing, when the truth was the ranch was failing, the land was unforgiving, and he was drowning in debt he couldn't pay. My letters may have been optimistic, he admitted. Were they dishonest? No, but then we're even. She moved to the window, looking out at the white fury beyond. My letters may have been optimistic too. I told you I was strong. I told you I was capable. And I am, Mr. Garrett, or I was. But the last 2 years have been difficult. I'm not as strong as I might have implied. Not yet. But I will be again. I will work until I am. The fire crackled behind them, the only sound in the small room besides the howl of the wind. Thomas watched her reflection in the window, the straight line of her back, the way she held her head up despite everything. She was ashamed, he realized. Ashamed of being thin, of being worn, of not being the strong farmhand he'd asked for. And he was ashamed too. Ashamed of his disappointment, of his regret, of the way he'd looked at her on the platform and seen only what she wasn't instead of who she was. There's a well out back, he said finally. I'll get water. We should eat something. I have bread, she said quickly, in my bag, and some cheese. It's not much, but I brought supplies. He had at least. A knapsack with food for the journey to the ranch, dried meat, hardtack, a few apples. We'll share. He escaped into the storm, grateful for the blast of cold that cleared his head. The well was just behind the station, protected by a small shelter. The water was ice cold, made his hands ache as he worked the pump, filled the canteen he'd brought. The snow was already piling up, drifts forming against the buildings, the wind sculpting them into strange shapes. When he came back inside, Mary had laid out their meager supplies on one of the benches, her bread and cheese, his dried meat and apples, a small cloth she must have used as a napkin. She'd arranged it carefully, almost prettily, making it look like more than it was. I'm afraid I don't have much in the way of dishes, she said apologetically. We'll manage. Thomas set down the canteen, shrugged out of his coat. The room was warming now, the stove doing its job. We should eat while the food's still good. No telling how long we'll be here. They sat on opposite benches, the makeshift meal laid out between them like a tiny bridge. Thomas watched as Mary carefully tore the bread, offered him the larger portion. He shook his head, pushed it back toward her. You need to eat, he said. So do you. I've been eating regular, you haven't. Her hand stilled. How would you know that? I can see it. He hadn't meant to say it so bluntly, but there it was. You're too thin, you've been hungry. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then carefully, she set down the bread. I suppose there's no point in pretending otherwise. Yes, I've been hungry. The last of my wages went to getting here. I didn't want to arrive with nothing, no way to contribute, so I economized. You starved yourself. I survived. There's a difference. Her voice was sharper now, and he saw the pride there, the fierce independence. I'm here, aren't I? I made it. That's what matters. Thomas picked up the bread, tore it in half, handed her one portion, and kept the other. Eat. That's an order. You're not my employer, Mr. Garrett. You're my husband. You can't order me. Fine. I'm asking. Please, eat. She took the bread, and he saw her hands shake slightly as she brought it to her mouth. The first bite seemed to cost her something. The admission, maybe, that she needed it. But once she started, she couldn't seem to stop. She ate slowly, carefully, but she ate everything he gave her. The bread, the cheese, some of the dried meat. He made sure she took more than half, made sure she drank enough water. When they finished, the wind had risen to a constant roar outside. The window rattled in its frame. Snow was piling up against the glass, blocking out what little light remained in the late afternoon. We should conserve the wood, Thomas said, eyeing the stack beside the stove. If Crenshaw's right about this being a 3-day blow, we'll need to make it last. I can help. I'm good with fires. Had to be, in the boarding house where I lived. The landlady was stingy with coal. They worked together in silence, banking the fire to burn slower and longer, arranging the wood to maximize efficiency. Their hands brushed once as they both reached for the same log, and Mary jerked back as if burned. "Sorry," she murmured. "No need." But Thomas understood. They were married, but they were strangers. Every accidental touch was fraught with awkwardness, with the weight of what they were supposed to be versus what they actually were. As darkness fell completely, the storm seemed to intensify. The wind didn't just howl now, it screamed. The building shook with each gust. Snow forced its way through invisible cracks, creating small drifts in the corners of the room. "We should try to sleep," Thomas said. "Long night ahead." "You take the bench," Mary said immediately. "I'll sit up." "Don't be foolish. You're exhausted." "So are you. And you're larger. You need the space more than I do." They argued about it for 5 minutes before Thomas finally said, "We'll both take a bench. One each. It's the only fair way." Mary nodded, relieved. She retrieved a thin blanket from her trunk, the only blanket she had, Thomas realized, and settled onto the far bench, as close to the stove as she could get. Thomas took the other bench, using his coat as a blanket, and tried not to think about how cold it would get as the night wore on. For a while, there was only the sound of the storm and the occasional pop from the stove. Thomas lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows dance in the firelight. He should say something, he thought. They were married. They should talk, get to know each other. But every conversational opening he thought of seemed either too personal or too trivial. "Mr. Garrett?" Mary's voice came soft through the darkness. "Yes?" "In your letters, you mentioned you'd been ranching for 5 years. What did you do before that?" A safe question, a practical question. "I worked on other men's ranches, saved everything I could. When old man Peterson died and his widow wanted to sell, I borrowed what I needed and bought the land, 300 acres. That sounds like a lot. It is, for some things. Not enough for others. Cattle need range. The land is good, but it's been a hard few years. Dry summers, hard winters. I lost half my herd last year to disease. The bank is impatient." He hadn't meant to tell her that last part. It slipped out in the darkness, in the strange intimacy created by the storm. "I see," Mary said quietly. "So you needed help, someone to share the work." "Yes. And you thought a wife would be cheaper than hiring hands." The bluntness of it stung because it was true. "I thought a wife would be a partner." "Someone who'd have a stake in making it work." "Someone who'd have nowhere else to go, you mean? Someone who'd have to stay and work, no matter how hard it got." Thomas sat up, stung. "That's not... I didn't mean... It's all right." Mary's silhouette shifted on her bench. "I'm not judging you, Mr. Garrett. I'm in no position to judge anyone. I came here for the same reasons, didn't I? I needed somewhere to go, someone to share the burden with. We're both trapped by our circumstances. At least we're honest about it." Trapped. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. "Is that how you see this?" Thomas asked. "As a trap?" "I see it as a choice I made. Perhaps the only choice I had, but still a choice. I could have stayed in Hartford, could have tried to find work in another mill, another city, but I chose to come here, to try something different, to hope for something better." She paused. "What about you? Do you see it as a trap?" Did he? Thomas thought about the letters he'd written, the money he'd sent, the papers he'd signed. He thought about standing on that platform this afternoon, seeing her step off the train, feeling his heart sink with disappointment and regret. He thought about the ranch waiting for them, the work that needed doing, the years stretching ahead. "I see it as a gamble, he said finally. "We both rolled the dice. Now we wait to see if they come up in our favor." An honest answer. Mary settled back down on her bench. "Thank you for that, at least." The temperature was dropping. Thomas could feel it, could see his breath starting to mist in the firelight. He got up and added another log to the stove, adjusting the damper to get a bit more heat. When he turned back, he saw Mary was shivering under her thin blanket. You're cold. I'm fine. You're shivering. I can see you shivering. It will pass. I just need to adjust. Take my coat. He grabbed it from his bench, brought it to her. Then you'll be cold. I'll manage. I'm used to it. So am I. But her teeth were starting to chatter. Thomas stood there holding his coat and realized how absurd this was. They were both freezing, both too proud to admit it, both willing to suffer rather than acknowledge the obvious solution. This is foolish, he said. What is? This. Us freezing separately when we could be warm together. We're married, Mary. It's not improper. It's practical. He saw her stiffen at the use of her first name, but she didn't correct him. What are you suggesting? One bench. Both blankets and my coat. Share the warmth. It's what anyone would do in a blizzard. It's survival, nothing more. For a long moment she didn't respond, then quietly, all right, but only because it's practical. Because it's survival. Of course. They arranged themselves awkwardly on the larger bench, Mary closer to the wall, Thomas on the outside, both blankets and his coat layered over them. At first they were careful not to touch, maintaining a careful space between their bodies. But the cold was relentless, and gradually, inevitably, they shifted closer. Thomas could feel her shivering, could feel the chill radiating from her thin frame. Without thinking, he put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer to his warmth. She stiffened, then slowly, carefully, relaxed against him. Is this all right? He asked. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. They lay there in the firelight, listening to the storm rage outside. Thomas could feel Mary's breathing gradually slow, could feel the tremors subsiding as she warmed. Her head rested against his shoulder, her hair soft against his neck. She smelled of travel and lavender soap, of hope and fear mixed together. Thomas? She'd never used his first name before. Yes? In your letters, you said life would be hard but honest. Did you mean that? I did. Then I need to tell you something. Something honest, even though it might make you angry. He felt his stomach tighten. Go on. I'm glad for the storm. What? I'm glad we're trapped here. Glad we have this time before we get to your ranch, before real life starts. Because I'm terrified, Thomas. I'm terrified of disappointing you, of not being strong enough, of failing at this. And I thought if we could just talk, just be honest with each other for a little while, maybe it would be easier when we got there. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of regret and disappointment he'd been carrying since the moment he saw her on that platform. You want honesty? He said. Here's honesty. When I saw you step off that train, my first thought was that I'd made a terrible mistake. You weren't what I expected. You were fragile, worn, not the strong farmhand I'd imagined. And I was angry at you for not being what I wanted, even though that was foolish and unfair. You'd told me nothing but the truth, and I'd built up a fantasy in my head anyway. Mary was very still against him. And now? Now I'm starting to think maybe I wasn't looking for the right things. Strength isn't just about size or muscle. You traveled 2,000 miles to build a new life. You survived years of hardship without breaking. You're honest enough to admit your fears. That takes a different kind of strength, a kind I'm not sure I have. You have it. Her voice was soft but certain. You're honest too. You could have lied, could have pretended you weren't disappointed, but you told the truth. That matters. They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, not awkward or strained, but something deeper, something that felt almost like understanding. Mary? Yes? I'm glad for the storm too. I didn't know it until just now, but I am. We needed this. Needed time to see each other without expectations or obligations getting in the way. She shifted slightly, burrowing deeper into his warmth. What do you see now, when you look at me? Thomas thought about it, really thought about it. What did he see? Not the strong farmhand he'd imagined, not the desperate mill worker from her letters, but the woman herself, brave enough to travel into the unknown, proud enough to refuse pity, honest enough to admit her fears. I see someone I could build a life with, he said, if we're both willing to try. To be patient with each other, to be honest. I'm willing, Mary whispered. I came all this way. I'm not giving up now. Neither am I. Outside, the storm howled its fury at the world. Inside, two strangers held each other in the firelight, beginning to learn what it meant to be partners. Not through grand gestures or romantic declarations, but through simple honesty, through shared warmth in the cold, through the slow, careful building of trust. The night stretched ahead, long and dark and uncertain, but they would face it together. And somewhere in the darkness, something that might have been hope began to take root. The fire burned low as the hours crept past midnight. Thomas woke periodically to add more wood, careful not to disturb Mary, who had finally fallen into a deep sleep against his shoulder. Each time he rose, the cold bit harder, and each time he returned to their shared warmth, he found it easier to draw her close, to settle into the strange comfort of her presence. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had grown worse. Thomas could hear the wind testing the building, probing for weaknesses, howling its frustration at finding none. Snow had completely covered the window now, sealing them into their small sanctuary of firelight and warmth. In the deep hours of the night, Mary stirred and woke. Thomas felt her tense as she remembered where she was, who she was with, but she didn't pull away. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Past midnight, I think. Hard to tell in this." She sat up slightly, and Thomas felt the loss of her warmth immediately. She must have felt the same because she quickly settled back against him, pulling the blankets tighter around them both. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you like that." "You needed rest. It's fine. Still, it's not very proper." Thomas almost laughed. "Mary, we're married and stranded in a blizzard, sharing body heat to stay alive." Proper went out the window, somewhere around dusk. He felt more than heard her laugh. A slight shake of her shoulders, a soft exhalation. "I suppose you're right. It's just strange. A week ago, I was in Hartford, working in the mill, sleeping in a boarding house with 5 other women. And now I'm here, in Wyoming, married to a man I've known for less than a day, trapped in a snowstorm. It doesn't seem quite real." "What were they like? The other women in the boarding house?" "Tired, hungry, hopeful, some of them. Others had given up hoping for anything better. We worked the same shifts, ate the same poor food, mended the same worn clothes." She paused. "When I told them I was answering a matrimonial advertisement, they thought I was either very brave or very foolish." "Which did you think you were?" "Both. Neither. I don't know. I just knew I couldn't stay there. Couldn't work myself into an early grave for pennies a day. Couldn't watch my life narrow down to nothing but survival. At least this way I had a chance at something different, even if it was frightening." Thomas felt her shiver again, though he didn't think it was from cold this time. "What frightened you most?" he asked. "Everything. The journey, meeting you, the possibility that you'd take one look at me and send me back, that I'd fail before I even had a chance to try." She was quiet for a moment. "What about you? What frightened you?" No one had ever asked him that. Men in the territory didn't talk about fear. They talked about challenges, difficulties, obstacles to overcome. But fear? That was weakness. But Mary had been honest with him. She deserved honesty in return. "The ranch," he admitted. "Every day I'm afraid I'll lose it, that I'll fail my father. He worked his whole life and never owned land, died dreaming of it. I promised myself I'd do better. But some days I wonder if I'm just fooling myself, if I'm trying to build something that can't be built out here. Why can't it? The land is hard, the weather is harsh, the market for cattle fluctuates. One bad year can wipe you out, and I've had 3 bad years in a row. The bank is patient, but not infinitely so. I needed help, but I couldn't afford to hire it, so I thought—" He trailed off. "You thought a wife would be cheaper than hired hands," Mary finished for him. "You already said that. But Thomas, there's no shame in it. Marriage has always been partly practical. My parents married because my mother needed security and my father needed someone to help run his shop. They built something good together, even if it started from necessity." "Did they love each other?" "Eventually. It grew over time like a garden, slow but steady. My mother used to say love that starts hot burns out fast. The love that lasts is the kind that builds careful, one day at a time." Thomas thought about that. Love as a garden. Something to tend and grow rather than something that strikes like lightning. It was a different way of thinking about what they were building. "Is that what you want?" he asked. "A careful love built slow?" "I want a partnership first," Mary said. "The rest can come if it comes. Or not. Either way, we'll survive." Survive. It seemed like such a modest goal, and yet Thomas realized it was exactly what they were both trying to do. Survive the storm. Survive the harsh territory. Survive their mismatched expectations and uncertain future. "When we get to the ranch," he said slowly, "it won't be easy. The house is small. 2 rooms, barely more than a cabin. The work is constant. The winters are brutal, worse than this storm. There will be days when you wonder why you ever left Hartford. I'm sure there will be, but there will also be days when I'm glad I left. Days when I watch the sun rise over land that's partly mine, when I eat food I've grown myself, when I go to sleep knowing I've built something with my own hands. That's worth the hard days." Her optimism surprised him. Given everything she'd endured, the hunger and hardship, the uncertain welcome, he'd expected, what? Bitterness? Resignation? But instead she sounded almost hopeful. "You really believe that?" he asked. "I have to, otherwise what's the point?" She shifted slightly, looking up at him in the firelight. "You believe it too, don't you? Otherwise you wouldn't have held on to the ranch through 3 bad years. You wouldn't have worked so hard to save something if you didn't think it was worth saving." She was right, Thomas realized. Despite his fears, despite the disappointments and setbacks, he did believe the ranch was worth fighting for. He'd just forgotten that somewhere along the way, lost it in the daily struggle to survive. "My father used to say that the land teaches you what you're made of," he said. "Out here, you can't hide from yourself, can't pretend to be stronger or better than you are. The land strips away all the pretense, shows you your true self." "That's frightening." "Yes, but also freeing, in a way. No point in lying when the truth is laid bare every day." Mary was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you think the land will show you about me?" "I don't know, but I think I'd like to find out." He felt her smile against his shoulder. "Good, because you're going to, whether you like it or not. We're in this together now." Together. The word resonated in the small space, bounced off the walls, settled over them like the blankets they shared. Together they would face the ranch, the work, the uncertain future. Together they would build something or fail trying. The storm howled on, but inside their small sanctuary, something new was growing. Not love, not yet, but understanding, respect, the fragile beginnings of trust. Thomas added another log to the fire, watched the flames catch and spread. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, 2 people who had been strangers were slowly becoming partners. And in the warmth of the firelight, with Mary's steady breathing against his shoulder and the storm testing their shelter, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt hope. Dawn came late and reluctant, filtering through the snow-packed window as a dim gray glow that barely qualified as light. Thomas woke to find Mary already awake, sitting up carefully so as not to disturb him, staring at the wall where the window should be visible. "It's still going," she said without turning. "I can hear it." She was right. The wind had changed pitch overnight, from a howl to a low, constant moan that seemed to vibrate through the building's bones. Thomas sat up, every muscle protesting. Sleeping on a wooden bench, even a shared one, was nothing like sleeping in a bed. "How long do you think we've been here?" Mary asked. Thomas checked his pocket watch, a gift from his father, one of the few valuable things he owned. "About 14 hours since the train arrived. Feels longer." "Everything feels longer in a storm." Mary stood, wrapping one of the blankets around her shoulders like a shawl. She moved to the stove, peered inside at the dwindling coals. "We're running low on wood." Thomas joined her, assessed the stack Crenshaw had left. Maybe enough for another day, if they were careful. 2 days, if they were willing to freeze. "We'll need to ration it. Keep the fire just high enough to stop us from getting frostbite." "Should we look for more? There might be wood somewhere in the building." "Maybe, but I'm not leaving this room until the wind dies down. A man could get lost between here and the back door in this whiteout, freeze to death 10 feet from shelter." Mary nodded, accepting this without argument. She was learning the rules of this harsh place quickly. "Then we make do with what we have." They worked together to bank the fire again, coaxing maximum heat from minimum fuel. It was a delicate balance. Too much air and the wood burned fast. Too little and it smothered. Mary's hands moved with practiced efficiency, and Thomas realized she'd meant it when she said she was good with fires. This wasn't the skill of someone who'd grown up with servants or easy comfort. This was survival skill, learned through necessity. Their breakfast was meager, the last of the bread, hard and stale now, washed down with cold water from the canteen. They ate in silence, both of them trying not to think about how long they might be trapped here, how quickly their supplies were dwindling. "Tell me about the ranch," Mary said finally, breaking the heavy quiet. "Not the practical parts. I know it's 300 acres and you raise cattle. Tell me what it looks like, what it feels like to be there." Thomas leaned back against the wall, remembering. "It sits in a valley between two ridges. There's a creek that runs through the east pasture, never goes dry, even in the worst summers. That's why Peterson bought the land originally. Water is everything out here. The house faces south, catches the morning sun. In summer, you can stand on the porch and see for miles, just grass and sky and the mountains in the distance. It's beautiful in a way that's hard to describe. Empty, but not lonely. Does that make sense?" "I think so. Like the emptiness is presence, not absence." "Exactly." He was surprised she understood. "In winter, it's different, harsher. The wind comes down from the mountains and nothing stops it. The snow piles up against the north wall of the house, sometimes higher than the roof. You can go days without seeing another soul." "Were you lonely before you sent for me?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. "Yes," he admitted. "More than I wanted to admit. A man can convince himself he doesn't need company, that work is enough. But then night comes and the house is silent and you realize how small you are against all that emptiness." Mary traced a pattern on the bench with her finger, not looking at him. "I was lonely in Hartford too, surrounded by people, but lonely." At the mill, we worked side by side but barely spoke over the noise of the machines. In the boarding house, we were too tired to do more than eat and sleep. I'd lie awake at night and listen to 5 women breathing in the darkness and feel more alone than if I'd been by myself. "Is that why you answered my advertisement? To escape the loneliness?" "Partly. Also because I wanted to matter. At the mill, I was just a pair of hands, replaceable, forgettable. I wanted to build something that couldn't be taken away, something that was mine. A home. A life. Even if it was hard, at least it would be real." Thomas understood that hunger better than he cared to admit. It was the same thing that had driven him to buy the ranch, to pour everything he had into making it work. The need to matter, to leave a mark, to prove that his life counted for something. "It will be real," he promised. "The work, the struggle, all of it. You'll matter there. Your hands will build things that last." "Our hands," Mary corrected gently, "if we're partners. Like you said." "Our hands," Thomas agreed. The morning crept forward with agonizing slowness. With nothing to do but wait, they talked. Thomas told her about learning to ranch, about the first time he'd delivered a breech calf and saved both the cow and the baby, about the spring he'd planted an apple tree near the house that had somehow survived despite the harsh climate. Mary told him about her parents, her father who died when she was 16, her mother who'd followed him a year later, leaving Mary alone in a world that had no patience for orphaned girls with no connections. She told him about the mill, about fingers bleeding from the rough work, about the constant fear of the machines that could catch a sleeve and pull you in before anyone could stop them. "Did you see it happen?" Thomas asked. "Someone getting caught?" "Once. A girl named Sarah. She was 15 and maybe 16. She leaned in too far to fix a jam, and her hair got caught. By the time they stopped the machine," Mary's voice trailed off. "I dream about it sometimes. The sound she made." Thomas reached out without thinking, took her hand. It was rough and calloused, the hand of someone who'd worked hard for a long time. "You don't have to tell me." "No, I want to. If we're being honest with each other, you should know what I'm running from. It's not just poverty or loneliness, it's fear. Every day in that mill, I was afraid of the machines, afraid of getting sick and losing my job, afraid of getting too old to work and ending up on the street. I was 24 years old and I felt ancient with fear." You're not afraid anymore? Oh, I'm terrified. But it's a different kind of fear. Out here, at least I'll have some control over my fate. I'll work hard or I won't. I'll learn or I won't. I'll survive or I won't. But it will be my choices that determine it, not just blind luck or the whim of some factory owner who doesn't even know my name. Thomas squeezed her hand, then released it. I can't promise it will be easier, but I can promise you won't be invisible. You'll matter. To the ranch. To me. Mary's eyes met his, and he saw something fierce and bright burning there. That's all I want. To matter. To be seen. I see you, Thomas said quietly. Maybe not clearly yet, maybe not completely, but I'm starting to. The wind howled outside, rattling the walls, but inside their small shelter, something was shifting. The awkwardness of strangers was giving way to something deeper, something more solid. They weren't lovers, might never be. But they were becoming allies, bound together by honesty and shared purpose. Around midday, the cold became impossible to ignore. They huddled close to the stove, wrapped in both blankets and Thomas's coat, but still the chill crept in. Mary's lips took on a bluish tinge despite the fire. We need to move, Thomas said. Get the blood flowing. Move how? There's barely room to stand. I'll show you. Thomas stood, began pacing the small space, swinging his arms, rotating his shoulders. After a moment, Mary joined him. They walked in circles around the stove like prisoners in a cell, and maybe that's what they were. Prisoners of the storm, of circumstance, of choices that couldn't be unmade. My mother used to say that winter was when you learned what you were made of, Mary said as they walked. Summer is easy. Anyone can be strong when the sun is shining and food is plentiful. But winter shows your true character. What does it show about you? Mary considered this. That I'm stubborn, maybe too stubborn. I should have given up a dozen times. When my parents died, when the mill cut my wages, when I was so hungry I could barely stand, but I didn't. I kept going because I didn't know what else to do. That's not stubbornness, that's courage. Is there a difference? I think so. Stubbornness is refusing to change even when you should. Courage is refusing to quit even when you could. Mary smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. That's a kind way of looking at it. Most people just called me foolish. Foolish for not marrying the butcher's son, who offered when I was 18. Foolish for not finding work as a housemaid when the mill started failing. Foolish for coming all the way to Wyoming to marry a stranger. Were they right? Do you feel foolish? Ask me in a year. If we're still alive and the ranch hasn't killed us both, maybe I'll have an answer. They walked until their legs ached, until the cold receded enough that they could sit again without shivering. Thomas added another precious log to the fire, watched it catch and burn. They were burning through their supply faster than he'd hoped. By tomorrow, they might have to choose between warmth and cooking whatever food they had left. Tell me about your father, Mary said suddenly. You mentioned him earlier, that he never owned land. Thomas settled back on the bench, surprised by the pang the question brought. He was a ranch hand, one of the best, could rope a steer in the dark, could doctor a sick horse better than most veterinarians, but he never had the money or the luck to buy his own place. He worked for other men his whole life, built up their ranches, made them rich while he stayed poor. That must have been hard. It ate at him, not bitterly. He wasn't a bitter man. But I'd see him sometimes, standing on the ridge looking out over land that wasn't his, and I'd know what he was thinking, what it could be, what it should be. He had dreams, my father, but they died with him. Is that why you bought your ranch? To fulfill his dreams? Maybe, or maybe to prove I could do what he couldn't. I'm not sure the difference matters. Either way, I can't fail. I won't let his dreams die twice. Mary was quiet for a long moment. That's a heavy burden to carry. It's the only one I have. My mother died when I was young. My father was all I had, and then he was gone too. The ranch is all I have left of him, of everything. Not anymore, Mary said softly. Now you have me. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. She sat wrapped in the thin blanket, her dark hair falling loose around her face, her eyes serious and steady. She wasn't what he'd imagined when he'd written those letters, wasn't the strong farmhand or the practical helpmate he'd convinced himself he needed. She was something else entirely, a woman who'd survived things that would have broken most men, who'd traveled into the unknown with nothing but hope and determination, who was offering him partnership when she could have offered resentment or fear. "Yes," he said. "Now I have you." The afternoon dragged on, measured only by the shifting light through the snow-covered window and the slow consumption of their wood supply. They talked more, but also fell into comfortable silences, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Mary mended a tear in her dress with needle and thread from her carpet bag. Thomas sharpened his knife on a whetstone he'd brought, the rhythmic scraping sound oddly soothing in the small space. "Thomas?" Mary's voice interrupted the quiet. "Hmm? What happens if the storm doesn't stop? If we run out of food and wood?" It was the question they'd both been avoiding. Thomas set down the knife, chose his words carefully. "The storm will stop. They always do, eventually. But if it doesn't? Then we burn the benches, break them up for fuel. We melt snow for water. We ration what food we have left and we wait. People have survived worse." "Have you? Survived worse?" Thomas thought about the winter when he was 19, working on a ranch in Montana, when a blizzard had buried the bunkhouse in snow for 6 days. They'd burned furniture and eaten nothing but beans and hardtack, but they'd survived. "Yes. Once. It wasn't pleasant, but it can be done." Mary nodded, accepting this. She didn't ask for false reassurance or empty promises. She just wanted the truth, and Thomas respected that more than he could say. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said, surprising himself with the fierceness in his voice. "I know I'm not what you hoped for. I know this isn't the start you imagined, but I promise you this. I'll keep you safe. Whatever it takes." "Why?" Mary's question was gentle, curious, not challenging. "You barely know me. I'm not what you wanted either. You could have turned me away at the station, sent me back east. I could have, but I didn't. I signed papers. I made a commitment. That means something to me. My word means something." "Is that all? Duty?" Thomas considered lying, taking the easy path. But they'd promised honesty, and he wouldn't break that promise. "No, it's more than duty. You've been here less than a day, and already I can see something. Strength. Not the kind I was looking for, but maybe the kind I needed. You don't complain, you don't demand, you just endure. And more than that, you're honest. You say what you mean. I've lived around men who lie as easily as breathing, who'll shake your hand and stab you in the back. You're different. Different good or different bad?" "Different good. Definitely good." Mary smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "You're different too. I thought you might be rough, crude. Some of the men who advertise for wives are just looking for unpaid labor. But you're not like that. You're kind. Even when you're scared or disappointed, you're kind." "I'm not kind," Thomas protested. "I'm just—" "You are," Mary interrupted. "You shared your food when you could have eaten it all. You gave me your coat when you were cold too. You held me last night so I wouldn't freeze, even though it was awkward and uncomfortable. That's kindness, Thomas. Don't pretend it's not." He didn't know what to say to that. Kindness felt like too generous a word for actions that seemed merely practical, merely human. But maybe that was what kindness was, doing the human thing when it would be easier not to. The temperature continued to drop as evening approached. Thomas could see ice forming in the corners of the room where their breath met the frigid air. The stove was doing its best, but the cold was relentless, seeping through every crack, every gap in the walls. "We should eat," Mary said, though neither of them moved toward their dwindling supplies. "We should ration, make it last." "We should eat," Mary repeated, more firmly this time. "Staying warm takes energy. If we don't eat, we'll freeze faster than if we run out of food. Trust me, I know what it's like to try to work while starving. Your body gives out faster than you think." She was right. Thomas knew she was right. They divided what was left, a handful of dried meat, 1 apple, some hardtack that was more rock than bread. It wasn't enough to satisfy their hunger, but it was enough to keep them alive. For now. As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, they returned to their shared bench, wrapping themselves in both blankets and the coat. This time, there was no hesitation, no awkwardness. They simply held each other, sharing warmth, sharing breath, sharing the quiet comfort of not being alone. My mother used to tell me stories on cold nights, Mary said, her voice soft in the darkness. Would you like to hear one? Yes. So Mary told him stories, fairy tales from her childhood, adventures she'd read in dime novels, memories of her parents that had taken on the quality of legend through repetition. Her voice was soothing, rhythmic, and Thomas found himself relaxing into the sound of it, letting it carry him away from the cold and the fear and the uncertainty. When she finished a story about a girl who outwitted a troll, Thomas said, "Your turn." My turn? To hear a story, what would you like to know? Mary thought for a moment. Tell me about the happiest day of your life. Thomas had to think. There hadn't been many purely happy days, mostly just days of hard work, punctuated by moments of satisfaction. But one memory stood out. The day I bought the ranch. I was 26 years old and I'd saved every penny I could for 5 years. I'd worked 3 different ranches, slept in bunkhouses, ate beans and salt pork, never spent money on anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. When I finally had enough for the down payment, I rode out to Peterson's place. His widow was there, and she showed me around. The house was run down, the barn needed work, half the fences were falling apart. But when I stood on that porch and looked out at those 300 acres, I felt like a king. It was mine. For the first time in my life, I stood on land that belonged to me. How did you feel? Terrified, Thomas admitted, and proud and free, all at once, like everything hard I'd ever done had been worth it for that one moment. Do you still feel that way? Some days. Other days I just feel tired. The pride is still there, buried under all the worry and work. But it's there. Mary shifted against him, her hand finding his in the darkness. We'll find it again, the pride, the freedom. When we get to the ranch, when we start building together, we'll remember why it matters. You sound certain. I am certain, because the alternative is unthinkable. We didn't come all this way to fail, Thomas. Neither of us. Her certainty was infectious. Thomas found himself believing her, believing that somehow they would make this work, that the ranch would survive, that they would survive, that this strange partnership forged in a blizzard would be strong enough to weather whatever came next. The night deepened. The storm continued its assault on the world outside, but inside, wrapped in warmth and darkness and growing trust, Thomas and Mary held fast to each other and to hope. Thomas? Mary's voice was barely a whisper. Yes? Thank you for choosing me. Even if it was for the wrong reasons, even if it wasn't what either of us expected. Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for taking it, for being brave enough to come here, for being honest enough to stay. They fell silent then, but it was a comfortable silence, full of understanding. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow fell, and the world was white and cold and unforgiving. But inside, 2 people who had been strangers were becoming something more. Not lovers yet, perhaps not ever, but partners, allies. 2 souls learning to weather the storm together. And as Thomas drifted toward sleep, Mary's heart beat steady against his chest. He thought maybe, just maybe, this desperate gamble might turn into something worth keeping after all. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The storm raged on, indifferent to human hope or fear. And 2 people held each other through the darkness, building something fragile and new from honesty and necessity and the simple human need not to be alone. Morning would bring new challenges, new fears, new tests of their resolve. But for now, in this moment, they had warmth and shelter and each other. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. The second day broke with a silence that was somehow worse than the howling wind. Thomas woke to find the storm had shifted again, the constant roar replaced by an eerie quiet punctuated only by the occasional gust that shook the building like a warning. Mary was already awake, sitting up and staring at the last 3 logs stacked beside the stove. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Thomas sat up, feeling the cold immediately. The fire had burned down to embers during the night, and the temperature in the room had dropped dangerously low. His breath came out in thick white clouds. How long will 3 logs last? Mary asked. If we're careful, maybe until tonight, if we're lucky tomorrow morning. Thomas rubbed his hands together, trying to work feeling back into his fingers. After that, we burned the benches. You said so yesterday. I did. Mary stood, wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and walked to the window. The snow had drifted against the glass, creating strange patterns of white and shadow. The storm is quieter. Does that mean it's ending? Maybe. Or maybe it's just gathering strength for another push. Hard to tell with blizzards like this. They can fool you, go quiet for hours, make you think it's safe to go outside, then come back twice as hard. So we wait. We wait. But waiting was becoming harder with each passing hour. Thomas could feel it in the tension of Mary's shoulders, in the way she kept touching her throat as if checking for something, in the restless pacing that had started again despite the cold. They were both fraying at the edges, the forced intimacy and uncertainty wearing them down in ways the cold couldn't quite reach. Thomas added one of the precious logs to the fire, coaxing it back to life. The flames caught reluctantly, as if even the fire was tired of fighting. He held his hands close to the warmth, watching Mary from the corner of his eye. She'd moved away from the window and was now examining the contents of her carpet bag with an intensity that suggested she was looking for something specific. "What are you searching for?" he asked. "My father's watch. I thought I'd packed it, but I can't find it." Her hands moved faster through the bag, growing more frantic. "It was the only thing of his I kept. Everything else we had to sell after he died, but I kept the watch. I know I packed it. I know I did." Thomas heard the edge of panic in her voice and moved closer. "Maybe it's in the trunk." "No, I put it in here. I'm sure of it. I wrapped it in a handkerchief and tucked it in the corner and—" She stopped, her whole body going still. Then, slowly, she pulled her hand from the bag, clutching a small bundle wrapped in faded blue fabric. "It's here. Of course it's here. I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Thomas understood. The watch wasn't just a watch. It was proof that her old life had existed, that her father had been real, that she'd come from somewhere before this frozen station and this uncertain future. Losing it would have meant losing the last anchor to who she'd been. "Can I see it?" Thomas asked gently. Mary unwrapped the handkerchief carefully, revealing a simple brass pocket watch, tarnished with age but clearly well cared for. She handed it to Thomas, and he felt the weight of it, the history it carried. "He was a watchmaker," Mary said softly. "Before he had the shop, before everything went wrong. He made this one himself when he was just learning the trade. It doesn't keep perfect time, runs about 3 minutes slow every day, but he never fixed it. Said the imperfection reminded him he was human, that even his best work would never be perfect." Thomas opened the case, saw the intricate mechanism inside, the tiny gears and springs working in their eternal dance. He was talented. He was. But talent doesn't always translate to success. The shop did well for a few years, but then the factory-made watches started coming in, cheaper and more accurate. People didn't want handmade anymore. They wanted affordable. He tried to adapt, tried to focus on repairs, but it wasn't enough. Mary took the watch back, closed the case with a soft click. He died owing more money than he'd ever made. The shop went to pay his debts. My mother and I ended up in a boarding house with nothing but what we could carry. How old were you? 16. Old enough to work, young enough to still believe things would get better. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. My mother lasted a year. Heart gave out. The doctor said it was natural causes, but I knew better. She died of heartbreak and exhaustion and the slow grinding down that happens when you lose everything you've built. Thomas watched her rewrap the watch, tuck it carefully back into the carpet bag. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the pain he saw in her eyes, but every phrase that came to mind felt hollow and useless. "I'm not going to let that happen to us," Mary said suddenly, fiercely. "I've seen what it looks like when people give up, when they let the world grind them down until there's nothing left. I won't do it. I won't let that be our story." "It won't be." "How can you be sure?" "Because you're right. We didn't come this far to fail. Your mother and father, they were good people caught in bad circumstances. But we have something they didn't. We have land. We have a chance to build something that can't be taken away by factories or changing markets. The land doesn't care about progress or profit. It just is. And if we're smart and strong and stubborn enough, we can make it work for us." Mary looked at him for a long moment, and Thomas saw something shift in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more determined. "You really believe that?" "I have to. It's the only thing keeping me going some days." "Then I'll believe it too." She moved closer to the fire, held her hands out to the warmth. "Tell me about the cattle. How many do you have? What breed?" The change of subject was deliberate, a conscious choice to turn away from the darkness of lost parents and failed dreams toward something more concrete, more manageable. Thomas was grateful for it. 43 head right now, down from 90 before the disease hit last year. Mixed breed, mostly Herefords with some Texas Longhorn blood. Hardy animals, good for the climate. They winter in the valley where there's shelter from the worst winds, but come spring we move them up to the high pastures where the grass is better. 43 doesn't sound like many. It's not. A successful ranch this size should run at least 150 head, maybe 200. But I'm rebuilding. Every calf that survives, every cow that makes it through winter, that's progress. Slow progress, but progress. How much does a cow cost? Thomas hesitated, not sure how much financial reality he should share, but they'd promised honesty, and Mary deserved to know what she was walking into. A good breeding cow, about $30 to $40. A bull, $60 to $80. I bought most of mine when prices were low, picked up some half-starved animals from ranchers who were going under and nursed them back to health. Saved money, but cost time. Mary did the math in her head, and Thomas watched her face as the numbers added up. "So you're carrying significant debt?" "Yes." "How significant?" "Enough that one more bad year could finish me. Us." The words hung in the cold air between them. Mary didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Then we make sure it's not a bad year." "It's not that simple. Weather, disease, market prices, most of it is out of our control." "But not all of it. What can we control?" Thomas thought about it, about the 1,000 small decisions that went into running a ranch, the daily choices that could mean the difference between success and failure. How we manage the herd, how we use the land, how we prepare for winter, whether we diversify, maybe add some chickens, a vegetable garden, things that can provide food and income that doesn't depend on cattle prices. I can manage chickens, and I know gardens. My mother kept one when I was young, before we lost the shop. She could make anything grow, even in poor soil. Mary's voice grew stronger, more animated. We could sell eggs in town, maybe butter if we get a cow for milk, vegetables in summer. It wouldn't be much, but every bit helps. It does. Thomas felt something loosening in his chest, the tight knot of fear and responsibility easing slightly. She wasn't just accepting the reality of their situation. She was already thinking about solutions, about how to make it work. "You're right. We'll need to be smart about it. Use everything we have, waste nothing." "That's how you survive," Mary said. "I learned that at the mill. The girls who made it were the ones who squeezed every penny, who shared resources, who helped each other. The ones who tried to go it alone always failed eventually." "We're not alone anymore." "No, we're not." They fell into silence again, but it was different now. Planning silence, thinking silence, the kind of quiet that comes when two people are working toward the same goal, even if they haven't quite figured out all the steps yet. The fire crackled, eating through the log with steady determination. Thomas checked his watch. Almost noon. They'd been in the station for more than 24 hours now. It felt like a week. He tried to imagine what the ranch looked like right now, buried under snow, the cattle huddled in whatever shelter they could find. He'd left food in the barn, had made sure the water troughs were clear before he left. But that was 3 days ago, before he'd known about the storm. The cattle should be all right. Should be. "You're worried about them," Mary said, reading his expression. "The cattle. Some. Mostly they can take care of themselves in winter. They're tougher than they look, but the young ones, the calves born late last season, they're vulnerable. If the storm caught them in open ground, there's nothing you can do about it from here." "I know. Doesn't stop the worry." "My mother used to say worry is just fear dressed up as planning. If you can't change it, you have to let it go." Easier said than done. "Everything worth doing is." Mary moved to the window again, peered through the small, clear spot where the snow had melted from the heat of the room. "I think the wind is dying down." really dying down this time. Thomas joined her, pressed his face close to the cold glass. She was right. The snow was still falling, but the wild horizontal drive had become a gentler vertical drift. The air looked clearer, less white. It's breaking, finally. How long until we can leave? Depends on how deep it got. Could be tomorrow if it stops completely. Could be longer if the drifts are too high. We'll need to wait for the stage road to get cleared, or for enough melting to make the wagon passable. And if it doesn't stop, if there's more coming, then we burn the benches and wait some more. But I don't think there is. This feels different. Feels like the end. They watched the snow fall for a long time, not talking, just standing side by side at the window like passengers watching the world go by. Thomas was acutely aware of Mary beside him, of the warmth radiating from her body, of the way her breath fogged the glass in small circles. She was so close he could count the stitches in her mended sleeve, could see the faint scar on her left hand that looked like it might be from a burn. "How did you get that?" he asked, gesturing to the scar. Mary glanced down at her hand. "Accident at the mill. A steam pipe burst and caught my hand. It's mostly healed now, doesn't even hurt unless it's very cold." "Does it hurt now?" "A little, but I barely notice it anymore. You get used to old injuries after a while. They become part of you." Thomas understood that. He had his own collection of scars. A jagged line on his forearm from barbed wire, a twisted finger that had been broken and set poorly, burn marks on his palm from a branding iron he'd gripped wrong. Each one told a story, marked a moment of pain that had become just another part of his history. "We should eat something," Mary said, pulling away from the window. "While we still have food to eat." Their supplies had dwindled to almost nothing, a few pieces of hardtack, the last apple bruised and soft, a handful of dried meat that was more leather than food. They divided it carefully, mathematically, making sure each portion was exactly equal. It was barely enough to take the edge off their hunger, but it was something. "Tomorrow, when the storm breaks, what's the first thing you want to do?" Mary asked around a mouthful of hardtack. "Get to the ranch. Check on the cattle. Make sure the house is still standing." "That's 3 things." "All right, the first thing is check on the cattle. What about you?" Mary thought for a moment. "Take a bath. A real bath. In hot water. Where I can scrub off 3 days of train travel and terror and cold." "Is that terribly vain?" "No, it's human." Thomas smiled, trying to imagine the ranch house with its single water pump and the tin tub he used maybe twice a year. "I can't promise hot water, but there's a tub. We'd have to heat water on the stove bucket by bucket, but it can be done." "Bucket by bucket is fine. I'd heat water in a thimble if that's what it took." She paused, then added more quietly, "I want to feel clean again. Feel like myself. I know that sounds strange, but travel makes you feel like you're wearing someone else's skin. Someone tired and dirty and afraid." "It doesn't sound strange. It sounds honest." They finished their meager meal in comfortable silence. The afternoon stretched ahead, long and empty. They were both tired of talking, tired of sitting, tired of the waiting that seemed to stretch into infinity. But there was nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, so they settled onto their shared bench and simply existed together in the firelight. Thomas found himself studying Mary when he thought she wasn't looking, the sharp line of her jaw, the way her hair fell across her face when she leaned forward, the nervous habit she had of touching her wedding ring, a plain brass band he'd sent with the tickets, nothing fancy but solid and real. She wore it on her left hand, and he noticed she turned it sometimes, spinning it around her finger as if testing whether it was really there. "Thomas?" Her voice interrupted his observation. "Yes?" "What happens when we get to the ranch? I mean practically. Where do I sleep? What are the arrangements?" It was the question they'd both been avoiding, the elephant in their small room that had grown larger with each shared touch, each moment of forced intimacy. They were married, but they were strangers. The law said one thing, but their reality was something else entirely. "The house has 2 rooms," Thomas said carefully. "A main room with the stove and the table, and a bedroom. There's a loft above the bedroom where I keep supplies, but it's not really set up for sleeping. I assumed you'd take the bedroom. I can sleep in the main room near the stove." "That doesn't seem fair. It's your house." "It's our house now. And the bedroom is warmer, more private. You should have it." Mary was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you want? Separate rooms?" "I want whatever makes you comfortable. We're partners, Mary, but I won't force anything else on you. If that comes, it comes naturally. If it doesn't," he shrugged, trying to seem casual about something that felt anything but. "We're both adults. We can make this work however we need to." "What if I said I don't know what I want yet?" Mary's voice was small, uncertain in a way it hadn't been before. "What if I said I'm so confused I can't think straight? 3 days ago, I was sleeping in a boarding house with 5 other women, all of us crammed together in one room. Now I'm married to a man I've known for 2 days, and I don't know if I should be terrified or grateful or both. Both is probably reasonable. Are you confused too?" Thomas considered lying, but that ship had sailed. "Yes. I thought I knew what I was getting into. Thought I had it all figured out. Practical marriage, clear expectations, simple arrangement. But nothing about this has been simple. You're not what I expected, and I'm fairly certain I'm not what you expected either, and we're stuck trying to figure it out as we go. Do you regret it? Sending for me?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples in every direction. Thomas thought about the platform, about seeing her step off the train, about the sinking disappointment he'd felt. He thought about the last 2 days, about her strength and honesty, about the way she hadn't complained or demanded or crumbled despite every reason to do all 3. "No," he said, and meant it. "I don't regret it. I regret my expectations, maybe. Regret building up a fantasy that was never fair to either of us. But I don't regret you. You're better than what I imagined. Different, but better." "How am I better?" "You're real. The woman I imagined in those letters was just an idea, a collection of useful qualities I needed to solve my problems. But you're a person. Complicated and brave and fragile and strong all at once. I can work with a person. I can build something with a person. An idea would have failed me the first time reality got difficult." Mary's eyes were bright in the firelight, and Thomas couldn't tell if she was going to cry or smile or both. "That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in years. It's just the truth. Sometimes the truth is the kindest thing." She shifted closer, not quite touching him, but near enough that he could feel her warmth. "I don't regret it either, coming here, marrying you. I'm terrified and uncertain and completely out of my depth, but I don't regret it. At least here I have a chance. At least here I matter." "You matter," Thomas confirmed, "more than you know." The fire burned lower, and Thomas added another log, the second to last one. Tomorrow they'd have to make hard choices about fuel and warmth and how long they could afford to wait for rescue. But for now, in this moment, they had heat and shelter and each other. Mary leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar over the past 2 days. "Tell me about the house. I want to picture it." So Thomas described it in detail. The main room with its stone fireplace and rough-hewn table, the bedroom with its simple bed frame and trunk for clothes, the porch that faced south toward the mountains. He told her about the barn with its hayloft and stalls, about the chicken coop he'd built but never filled with chickens, about the root cellar where he stored potatoes and carrots and whatever else he could coax from the difficult soil. "It sounds lonely," Mary said. "It is, but maybe it won't be anymore." "We'll make it a home," Mary said with sudden determination. "Not just a house, but a real home. With curtains in the windows and food in the cellar and chickens in the coop. We'll plant that garden in spring and fill it with vegetables. We'll make it beautiful." Beautiful might be ambitious. Maybe. But comfortable at least. Lived in. Loved. She paused, then added softly, "I've never had a home of my own. My parents' house was sold for debts. The boarding houses were just places to sleep. But the ranch, that could be home. Really home." Thomas felt the weight of that hope, the responsibility of it. She was trusting him with something precious and fragile. The dream of belonging somewhere, of having a place in the world that was hers. He couldn't afford to fail her, wouldn't fail her. "It will be," he promised. "We'll make it home together." Night fell again, the 3rd night since the train had arrived. The storm had quieted to occasional gusts, the snow falling in soft whispers instead of violent screams. They rationed the last log carefully, keeping the fire just barely alive, knowing tomorrow would bring either freedom or the need to burn their furniture for warmth. But as they settled onto their bench, wrapped in blankets and each other's warmth, Thomas felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Peace. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but peace. The quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. That this partnership forged in a blizzard was strong enough to weather whatever storms waited beyond the station walls. Mary's breathing slowed and deepened as she fell asleep against him. Thomas stayed awake longer, watching the shadows dance on the walls, listening to the wind's final protests. Tomorrow, they would leave this small sanctuary and face the real world, the ranch, the work, the uncertain future. Tomorrow, the test would really begin. But tonight, in the dying firelight, with Mary warm and trusting in his arms, Thomas let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had what it took to survive. Not just the blizzard, but everything that came after. And as sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was that sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances. Sometimes desperation led to something real. Sometimes a marriage of necessity could become a marriage of choice, if they were brave enough to let it. Morning arrived with a stillness so complete it woke Thomas before he'd fully slept. The absence of wind was almost louder than the storm had been, a silence that pressed against his ears and made him sit up carefully, trying not to disturb Mary. The fire had died completely during the night, reduced to cold ash in the belly of the stove. The room was brutally cold, frost patterns decorating the inside of the walls like silver lace. But through the window, he could see it. Light. Real light, not the gray dimness of storm-filtered day, but actual sunlight breaking through scattered clouds. The blizzard had passed. "Mary?" He touched her shoulder gently. "Wake up. It's over." She stirred slowly, reluctant to leave the warmth of sleep and blankets. When she finally opened her eyes, Thomas saw the moment awareness returned. The brief confusion of waking in a strange place, followed by memory, followed by acceptance. She'd gotten faster at that transition over the past 3 days, he noticed, adapting. "The storm?" Her voice was hoarse from sleep and cold. "Look." She turned toward the window, and he watched her face transform as she saw the sunlight. For a moment, she looked younger, hopeful, like the girl she must have been before the mill and hunger and hard years had carved lines around her eyes. "We made it," she whispered. "We did." They rose together, stiff and aching from another night on the wooden bench. Thomas went to the window, brushed away the frost, and assessed the world outside. Snow lay everywhere, deep and pristine, transforming the shabby train station into something almost beautiful. Drifts had piled against buildings, some as high as the roof lines. The town square was completely buried, landmarks erased under the white blanket. "How deep is it?" Mary asked, joining him at the window. 3 feet in places, maybe 4 where it drifted. Too deep for the stage, even if it were running. We'll need to wait for the road crews to clear the main routes. How long will that take? In town, maybe a day. Out to the ranch? Thomas shook his head. Could be 3 or 4 days. Maybe a week. Mary's face fell. A week. We can't stay here a week. We have no food left. And that was the last log we burned. She was right. Thomas looked at the bench they'd been sleeping on, mentally calculating its burning time. Maybe 6 hours if they broke it into small pieces and rationed carefully. The other bench would give them another 6. 12 hours of heat total, if they were lucky. Not nearly enough. "We need to find another option," he said. "Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. If we can get across the square, if she left it unlocked or I can force a door, we might find supplies, food, firewood, something." "How far is it?" 50 yards, maybe less. That's nothing. In 3 feet of snow, it might as well be a mile. We'll have to wade through drifts, break trail the whole way. If one of us falls, gets snow down our clothes, the cold could kill us before we make it back. Mary's jaw set in that stubborn line he was learning to recognize. "So we're careful, we go slowly, we help each other, but we can't just sit here and freeze, Thomas. We have to try." He wanted to argue, to find a safer option, but there wasn't one. They were out of food and fuel, and waiting for rescue that might not come for days was a kind of slow suicide. At least attempting to reach the boarding house gave them a chance. "All right, but we do it smart. We tie ourselves together with my belt, stay close. If one person starts to struggle, we both turn back immediately. Agreed? Agreed. They prepared as best they could with what they had. Thomas wrapped Mary's feet in strips of fabric torn from his spare shirt, trying to waterproof her worn boots. She did the same for him with pieces of her petticoat, neither of them commenting on the intimacy of kneeling before each other, wrapping cloth around ankles and calves. They put on every layer they owned, bundled the blankets around their shoulders like cloaks, and Thomas used his belt to tie them together at the waist, close enough to help each other, far enough to move independently. At the door, Thomas paused with his hand on the latch. If this goes wrong, if we can't make it, we turn back. Pride isn't worth freezing to death over. I know. Promise me. If I say we turn back, you don't argue. Mary met his eyes steadily. I promise. But the same goes for you. If I say we're in trouble, you listen. Deal! Thomas opened the door and the cold hit them like a physical blow. The temperature had dropped even further overnight, the clear sky allowing the Earth's heat to escape into space. The air burned going into his lungs, so cold it felt like breathing broken glass. Beside him, Mary gasped, but didn't retreat. The first step into the snow was shocking. It came up past Thomas's knees, dense and heavy, requiring real effort to push through. He moved forward slowly, breaking trail, feeling Mary follow close behind. The 50 yards to the boarding house stretched ahead like an impossible distance. They'd made it perhaps 10 feet when Mary stumbled. Thomas felt the tug on his belt, turned quickly to find her floundering in a drift that came up to her waist. He grabbed her arm, pulled her upright, and they stood for a moment catching their breath, already exhausted. You all right? He asked. Yes. Just lost my footing. I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Thomas could see her shivering already, could see the fear in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. This was harder than either of them had anticipated, and they'd barely started. We keep going, he said, making it a statement rather than a question. Slow and steady. They pushed forward, each step a battle against the snow that seemed determined to stop them. Thomas's legs burned with effort, his breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to ice in his beard. Behind him, he could hear Mary struggling, could feel the occasional tug on the belt when she needed to steady herself against him. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. She just kept moving. Halfway across the square, Thomas's foot found a hidden depression, a wheel rut or drainage ditch buried under the snow. He went down hard, dragging Mary with him. They landed in a drift, snow everywhere, cold seeping through their clothes with terrible efficiency. For a moment, panic clawed at Thomas's throat. This was how people died in blizzards. One fall, wet clothes, and the cold became a killer. Up, he gasped. We have to get up. They struggled to their feet, supporting each other, brushing frantically at the snow that clung to their clothes. Thomas could already feel the wetness against his skin, the chill spreading. They had minutes, not hours. If they didn't get inside soon, they wouldn't make it. Keep moving, Mary said through chattering teeth. We're close. She was right. The boarding house loomed ahead, its dark bulk only 20 feet away now. So close. They pushed forward with renewed desperation, no longer trying to be careful or graceful, just moving, fighting for each foot of progress. When they finally reached the porch steps, Thomas nearly wept with relief. He pulled Mary up beside him, and they stood under the porch roof gasping for breath, their bodies shaking with cold and exhaustion. The front door was locked, but Thomas put his shoulder to it, and on the second hit, the old wood gave way with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the cold air. They stumbled inside, and Thomas slammed the door behind them, blocking out the killing cold. The boarding house was dark and cold too, but not Arctic cold, not death cold. They stood in the entryway, dripping melted snow, both of them shaking so hard they could barely stand. We need to get these wet clothes off, Thomas said, his voice shaking as badly as his body, before hypothermia sets in. He untied the belt binding them together, and they moved deeper into the house, into what appeared to be a sitting room. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light, but Thomas could make out furniture shapes, could feel carpet under his feet instead of bare wood. He opened the curtains, letting in the weak sunlight, and the room resolved into focus. It was simply furnished but comfortable. 2 worn sofas, a rocking chair, a fireplace stacked with wood, as if Mrs. Henderson had meant to light it before she left. Thomas moved to the fireplace immediately, his frozen fingers fumbling with matches he found on the mantel. It took 3 tries before he got one lit, and when the kindling finally caught, he could have kissed the flames. "Mary, get close to the fire. Get warm." But when he turned, he saw her standing in the middle of the room, dripping and shaking, making no move toward the heat. Her eyes were glazed, unfocused. Shock, Thomas realized. The cold and fear and exertion had pushed her past her limits. He went to her quickly, began unbuttoning her coat with clumsy fingers. "Come on, we need to get you out of these wet things." "I'm fine," she mumbled, but she wasn't. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as paper. "You're not fine. You're freezing. Work with me here, Mary. I need you to help me get these clothes off." Some part of his urgency must have penetrated her shock because she started moving, helping him peel away the wet layers. Her coat, her dress, her petticoats, all of it soaked through and ice cold. Thomas stripped down to his union suit, then wrapped her in a blanket he found draped over one of the sofas and pulled her close to the fire. "Stay here. Don't move. I'm going to find dry clothes." He left her huddled by the growing flames and searched the house quickly. Mrs. Henderson's bedroom yielded a wardrobe full of dresses and undergarments, all too large for Mary but dry and warm. He grabbed an armful and returned to find Mary exactly where he'd left her, staring into the fire like it held all the answers to questions she couldn't articulate. "Put these on," he said gently, handing her a plain cotton dress and some wool stockings. "I'll turn around. You need to get out of those wet underclothes." He gave her privacy, heard the rustle of fabric as she changed. When he turned back, she looked almost comical in the too large dress, the hem pooling around her feet, the shoulders hanging loose. But her color was better, and her eyes had regained some focus. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself despite the dry clothes. "That was closer than I want to admit. We both could have died out there. It was foolish to try it. But we didn't die. We made it. And now we have shelter and heat and hopefully food." Thomas had already been thinking about that. "Stay here. Keep warm. I'll search the kitchen." Mrs. Henderson's kitchen proved to be better stocked than he'd dared hope. Potatoes in a bin in the pantry, dried beans, flour, cornmeal, a few jars of preserves, and, treasure of treasures, a side of bacon hanging in the cold cellar. Not a feast, but enough to keep them alive for days if necessary. He returned to the sitting room to find Mary had added more wood to the fire and was standing closer to it now, holding her hands out to the warmth. She looked steadier, more present. "There's food," he reported. "Not much, but enough. We can wait here until the road's clear, until it's safe to get to the ranch." Mary nodded slowly. "We'll leave money for Mrs. Henderson, for the food and firewood and the door you broke." "Of course. And we'll clean everything before we go. Make it right." "We will." She turned to face him fully, and Thomas saw tears tracking down her face, though he hadn't heard her cry. "I was so scared out there, Thomas. When I fell, when the cold got through my clothes, I thought we'd made a terrible mistake. Thought we were going to die in a snowdrift 50 feet from shelter, and it would be our own fault for being too stubborn to wait. But we didn't die." "No. Because you pulled me up. Because you kept me moving. Because you wouldn't let me give up even when I wanted to." She wiped at her face with the oversized sleeve. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday, about building something together, about being partners. And I realize I didn't really understand what that meant until today. It means not having to face the hard things alone. It means someone to pull you up when you fall." Thomas crossed the room to her, took her cold hands in his. "That's exactly what it means, for both of us. I couldn't have made it across that square alone either. We did it together." "Together," Mary repeated softly, and then she did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest, not crying now, just breathing, letting herself be held. Thomas put his arms around her carefully, felt her gradually relax into his embrace. They stood like that for a long time, warming each other, finding comfort in simple human contact. The fire crackled and popped, filling the room with heat and light. Outside, the world was still frozen and dangerous, but inside they had shelter and warmth and each other. Eventually, Mary pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes and something that might have been the beginning of a smile. I must look terrible. You look alive. That's all that matters. I should help with the food. We should eat something while we can. They worked together in the kitchen, more comfortable with each other after the trial of the crossing. Thomas showed Mary where things were, and she took charge with the easy competence of someone who'd cooked in difficult conditions before. She made a simple meal: bacon fried crisp, potatoes sliced and cooked in the grease, coffee boiled strong and bitter in a battered pot. They ate at Mrs. Henderson's kitchen table, and it felt almost normal, almost like they were a real couple in their own home rather than two strangers sheltering in a borrowed house after nearly dying in the snow. The food was plain but hot, and they ate every bit, both of them ravenous after 3 days of rationing. "This is the best meal I've had in months," Mary said, around a mouthful of potato. "Mrs. Henderson knows how to stock a pantry." "We should do the same, at the ranch. Make sure we're prepared for emergencies." She paused, then added more quietly, "Make sure we never have to go hungry again." Thomas understood what she wasn't saying, that the fear of hunger had been with her so long it had become part of her bones. A constant companion she couldn't quite shake even when food was in front of her. He'd seen it in the way she ate, quickly, efficiently, as if someone might snatch the plate away at any moment. "We'll keep the pantry full," he promised, "and the root cellar. We'll put up vegetables in summer, preserve what we can. You'll never go hungry again, Mary, not if I can help it. And you won't have to face the work alone anymore. We'll share it, the burden and the benefit both." After the meal, exhaustion hit them both like a physical force. The adrenaline that had carried them through the crossing was gone, leaving only bone-deep weariness in its wake. Mary's eyes were drooping even as she tried to help clean up, and Thomas knew he wasn't much better. "We should rest," he said. "There are bedrooms upstairs, real beds." They climbed the stairs together, Thomas carrying Mary's carpet bag and his own knapsack that he'd retrieved from the station that morning. The second floor had 4 small rooms, clearly meant for boarders. Thomas opened the door to the largest one, which held a double bed with a thick quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the snow-covered square. "You take this one," he said. "I'll take the room across the hall." Mary stood in the doorway, looking at the bed with such longing it was almost painful to see. "Thomas?" "Yes?" Would you stay? Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone right now." The request surprised him, but when he thought about it, he understood. After 3 days of forced proximity, of shared warmth and whispered confessions in the dark, being alone probably felt wrong. Dangerous, even. Like they might lose the fragile connection they'd built if they separated now. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. We've shared a wooden bench for 3 nights. A real bed will be luxury in comparison." They settled onto the bed fully clothed, too tired and too proper to do otherwise. Mary curled on her side facing the window, and Thomas lay on his back beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. But as sleep began to pull at him, he felt her hand reach back and find his, her fingers lacing through his with a trust that made his chest tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up. For getting us here. For being someone I can count on." "You can count on me, Mary. Always." "I know, that's what scares me." "Why does that scare you?" "Because I'm starting to count on it. Starting to need it. Starting to need you." Her voice was so soft he almost couldn't hear it. "I didn't want to need anyone. I wanted to be strong enough on my own, but I'm not. I need you, Thomas. And that terrifies me." Thomas squeezed her hand, felt her squeeze back. "I need you too. Does that help? Knowing it goes both ways?" "Maybe. I don't know. Ask me when I'm less tired and more certain we're not going to die." "We're not going to die." "Promise?" "I promise. We're going to make it to the ranch. We're going to build that life you talked about. We're going to survive." "Together?" "Together." Mary's breathing deepened and slowed, sleep claiming her quickly. Thomas lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 3 days. He'd expected a hired hand in a wife's clothing. He'd gotten a partner instead. Someone brave and broken and determined all at once. someone who was teaching him that strength came in forms he hadn't known to look for. The sunlight through the window painted patterns on the wall, bright and clean after the storm's darkness. Tomorrow, they would have to figure out their next steps. How long to stay, when to attempt the journey to the ranch, how to repay Mrs. Henderson for their intrusion. But those were tomorrow's problems. Today, they had survived. They had heat and food and shelter. They had each other's hands clasped tight in sleep. They had made it through the worst and come out the other side changed but alive. And that, Thomas thought as sleep finally found him, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The afternoon sun moved slowly across the floor, marking time in bands of light and shadow. Outside, the world remained frozen and still, waiting for the thaw that would come eventually, that always came. Inside, two people slept the sleep of the exhausted, the relieved, the survivors. And in their joined hands was the promise of something neither had expected to find in a marriage of desperation. Not love, not yet, but something that might become love given time and care and the continued choice to show up for each other when things got hard. Something worth fighting for, worth surviving for, worth building a life around. The storm had broken, the worst was over. Now came the real test, learning to live with what the storm had revealed. They woke to voices in the street below, the sound of shovels scraping against frozen ground, men calling to each other as they cleared the main roads. Thomas sat up carefully, trying not to disturb Mary, but she was already awake, lying still with her eyes open, listening. "They're digging out," she said quietly. "Sounds like it. Probably started at first light." Thomas checked his watch. Nearly noon. They'd slept for hours, the deep sleep of bodies pushed beyond their limits, and finally allowed to rest. Mary turned to look at him, and in the daylight streaming through the window, Thomas saw her clearly in a way he hadn't before. Her face was thinner than it should be, yes, but the bone structure beneath was elegant, almost aristocratic. Her eyes, dark and serious, held depths he was only beginning to understand. She was beautiful, he realized with some surprise, not in the conventional way, not soft or delicate, but beautiful nonetheless. The kind of beauty that came from surviving things that should have broken you and refusing to break anyway. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I was a fool on that platform when I first saw you." "Because I wasn't what you expected?" "Because I was looking for the wrong things. I wanted someone strong and capable, and I missed the fact that you were both those things. I just couldn't see it because you didn't look the way I thought strength should look." Mary sat up, smoothed down her borrowed dress. "We were both looking for the wrong things, I think. I wanted security and safety, someone to protect me from the world. But that's not what you're offering, is it? You're offering partnership, the chance to protect each other. Is that enough? Is partnership enough? I don't know yet. Ask me again when we've had more than 3 days together, when we've seen each other in normal circumstances instead of trapped by a blizzard." Thomas stood, moved to the window. Below he could see men working in teams, clearing snow from the main street. A wagon was already moving slowly through town, its wheels cutting deep ruts in the snow. The world was coming back to life. "We should go down," he said. "See what we can learn about the roads, figure out when we can leave for the ranch." They descended together to find Mrs. Henderson's kitchen exactly as they'd left it, the dishes washed and put away from their meal the night before. Thomas built up the fire in the stove while Mary started coffee, and they moved around each other with an ease that came from shared hardship, from learning each other's rhythms over 3 days of forced proximity. The coffee was still brewing when someone knocked on the front door. Thomas and Mary exchanged glances, caught, trespassing, no matter how good their reasons. Thomas opened the door to find Station Master Crenshaw standing on the porch, his beard white with frost, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Thought I might find you here," Crenshaw said without preamble. "Saw the smoke from the chimney, and I know Mrs. Henderson is still at her daughter's place. Figured it was either you two or squatters." "We broke in," Thomas admitted. "The station ran out of wood and food. We had no choice." "Relax, Garrett. I'm not here to arrest you. You did the smart thing. Better to break a door than freeze to death." Crenshaw stepped inside, stamped snow from his boots. "I came to check on you, make sure you both survived. That was a hell of a storm, worst I've seen in 30 years. We're fine, Mary said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. Thanks to the shelter and Mrs. Henderson's supplies, we'll pay for everything, of course. The door, the food, the firewood. Crenshaw waved a dismissive hand. Martha Henderson is the most practical woman I know. She'd have invited you in herself if she'd been here. But I'll let her know you're willing to settle up. She'll appreciate that. He accepted the cup of coffee Mary offered, took a long drink. Roads are clearing faster than expected. Main Street's already passable for wagons. Stage will probably run tomorrow, day after at the latest. What about the road north, to my ranch? Thomas asked. That's trickier. County crews working their way out, but the outlying roads are low priority. Could be 3-4 days before they reach your place. Maybe longer. Thomas felt Mary's tension even before she spoke. We can't wait that long. Thomas needs to check on his cattle. They've been without care for almost 5 days now. Could hire a horse, Crenshaw suggested. Morrison at the livery has a few that could handle the snow if you go careful. 2 horses, you and the missus, could make it to the ranch by nightfall if you left at first light. Thomas considered it. 2 horses meant Mary could ride one while he broke trail on the other. It was risky. The snow was still deep and there were a dozen ways it could go wrong. But staying here while his cattle possibly starved or froze wasn't an option either. How much would Morrison charge? For you? Probably $20 for the pair, including saddles and gear. He knows you're good for it. $20 they didn't really have to spare. But what choice was there? Thomas looked at Mary, saw her nod slightly. They were in agreement. Tell Morrison we'll take them. First light tomorrow. After Crenshaw left, they spent the rest of the day preparing. Thomas checked their supplies, repacked their bags, made sure everything was secure and ready for the journey. Mary mended a tear in his coat, reinforced the makeshift waterproofing on their boots, and packed food from Mrs. Henderson's pantry with careful notes about quantities and costs so they could repay her fairly. As evening fell, they sat together in the sitting room, the fire burning low, neither of them quite ready to retreat to bed despite their exhaustion. Are you nervous? Mary asked. About tomorrow? Some. More nervous about what we'll find at the ranch. How many cattle I lost. How much damage the storm did. We'll handle it. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. Thomas looked at her, this woman who'd been a stranger 4 days ago and now felt like the most solid thing in his life. You keep saying that. Together. Like you really believe it. I do believe it. I have to. Because the alternative, being alone, going back to what I was before, that's not acceptable. I'd rather face whatever's coming with you than face anything alone ever again. Even if the ranch is a disaster, even if the cattle are dead and the house is damaged and we're facing months of hard work just to get back to where we started, even then, especially then, hard work I can handle. Being alone, really alone, not just physically but emotionally alone, that's what I can't survive again. Thomas reached for her hand, found it waiting for his. You won't have to. I meant what I said at the station. We're partners now, for better or worse. That sounds like wedding vows. Maybe it should be. Maybe that's what we should have said instead of signing papers through a matrimonial agency. Simple vows, simple promises. Be honest, be kind. Don't face the hard things alone. Mary smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her that reached all the way to her eyes. I like those vows better than the traditional ones. They're more honest, more real. Then let's make them, right here, right now, just between us. Whatever happened at that agency, whatever papers we signed, they don't matter as much as what we promise each other in this moment. Mary turned to face him fully, her hand still in his, her expression serious and open and brave. All right, I promise to be honest with you, Thomas Garrett, even when the truth is hard, especially when the truth is hard. I promise to be honest with you, Mary Garrett, and to listen when you speak, even when I don't want to hear it. I promise to be kind, to remember that we're both doing our best even when our best isn't perfect. I promise not to face the hard things alone, to share the burden and accept help when I need it. I promise the same, to ask for help instead of suffering in silence, to be strong enough to be weak sometimes. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the promises settling over them like a benediction. It wasn't a fancy ceremony with witnesses and celebration. It was just 2 people in a borrowed room making promises they intended to keep, but somehow it felt more binding, more real than any official document could ever be. "We should sleep," Thomas said eventually. "Long day tomorrow." They climbed the stairs together and returned to the same room they'd shared earlier, the same bed. But this time when they lay down, there was no hesitation, no careful maintenance of distance. Mary curled against Thomas's side, and he put his arm around her naturally, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. "Thomas?" Her voice was soft in the darkness. "Hmm?" "I'm glad it was you. Glad your advertisement was the one I answered. Even with everything that's happened, even with the fear and uncertainty, I'm glad." "So am I. I didn't know it at first, but I know it now. You're exactly who I needed, Mary. Not who I thought I wanted, but who I actually needed." That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. "Then I need to say nicer things more often." She laughed softly, and the sound was like light in the darkness. "We're going to be all right, aren't we? Whatever we find at the ranch, whatever challenges come, we're going to make it." "Yes, we're going to make it." And lying there in the dark, holding this woman who'd become his partner in every way that mattered, Thomas believed it. Not because the challenges would be easy or the path would be smooth, but because they'd proven they could face the hard things together. The blizzard had been a test neither of them had expected, and they'd passed it. Not perfectly, but honestly. Not without fear, but without giving up. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way. Morning came cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that hurt to look at. They rose early, dressed in layers, packed their meager belongings. Thomas left an envelope on Mrs. Henderson's kitchen table with enough money to cover the door, the food, the firewood, and then some. It was money he couldn't afford to spend, but it was the right thing to do. The walk to Morrison's livery was easier now with the streets cleared, though the cold was still brutal. Morrison himself was a grizzled man in his 60s who'd known Thomas since he first came to the territory. "Heard you got yourself a wife," Morrison said, looking Mary over with frank curiosity. "Brave woman, coming out here sight unseen." "Brave or foolish," Mary said with a slight smile. "Time will tell which." Morrison barked a laugh. "I like her, Garrett. She's got spine. You'll need that out at your place." He led them to two horses, both sturdy and calm-looking. "This is Dancer, and this is Scout. They're good in snow. Won't spook easy. Take care of them, and they'll take care of you." Thomas helped Mary mount, showed her how to hold the reins, how to sit the saddle. She learned quickly, adapting to the horse's movements with the same determination she'd shown for everything else. The ride north was slow and careful, the horses picking their way through snow that in places still came up to their chests. Thomas led, breaking trail, with Mary following close behind. The sun was bright but gave no warmth, and the wind had a knife edge that cut through every layer they wore. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat some of the food Mary had packed. Standing in the middle of the vast white landscape, nothing but snow and sky in every direction, Thomas felt the weight of what they were attempting. 15 miles in winter conditions with a woman who'd never ridden this far before, heading toward a ranch that might be buried or damaged, to check on cattle that might be dead. "You're thinking too much," Mary said, watching his face. "I can see the worry from here." "Can't help it. There's a lot that could go wrong. There's also a lot that could go right. The cattle might be fine, the ranch might be untouched. We might make it there without incident and start our lives together properly, without blizzards and emergencies and sleeping on wooden benches." "You're an optimist." "No, I'm a realist who's choosing to hope instead of despair. There's a difference." They rode on, and as the afternoon wore toward evening, Thomas began to recognize landmarks. The twin rock formations that marked the edge of his property, the stand of cottonwoods along the creek, and finally, as the sun touched the horizon, the house itself, small and dark against the snow but standing intact, smoke rising from the chimney. Smoke from the chimney. Thomas pulled up short, confused. He'd left no fire burning. The house should be cold and dark, but someone was there. "Thomas?" Mary had stopped beside him, following his gaze. "Is something wrong?" "Someone's in the house. There shouldn't be anyone in the house." They approached cautiously, and as they got closer, Thomas saw other signs of occupation. A path shoveled from the house to the barn. Fresh snow cleared from the porch, and when the door opened, a familiar figure emerged. "About damn time you showed up," Jacob Morrison said. his weathered face breaking into a grin. Been wondering if that storm got you or if you were smart enough to hole up in town. Jacob. Thomas dismounted quickly, relief flooding through him. What are you doing here? What do you think? Storm was coming, and I knew you'd gone to town to fetch your bride. Knew you wouldn't make it back before it hit. So I came over to check on your stock, make sure they had food and water. Storm ended up worse than expected, so I stayed. Been here 3 days keeping your cattle alive and your pipes from freezing. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. You didn't have to do that. The hell I didn't. We're neighbors, aren't we? That means something out here. Besides, I knew you'd do the same for me. Jacob's eyes moved to Mary, still mounted, watching the exchange with wide eyes. This must be the missus. Ma'am, welcome to the territory. Hope my boy here has been treating you right. Mary dismounted with Thomas's help, and he saw her swaying slightly, exhausted from the long ride. He's been treating me very well, Mr. Morrison, better than I had any right to expect. Just Jacob, we don't stand on formality out here. Jacob looked between them, and something in his expression softened. You two look like you've had a hell of a few days. The blizzard trapped us at the station, Thomas explained. We ran out of supplies, had to break into Mrs. Henderson's boarding house to survive. Just made it out this morning. Well, you're here now. That's what counts. Jacob gestured toward the house. I got stew on the stove and the fire built up. You both should eat, get warm. I'll head home before full dark. The house was warm and welcoming in a way Thomas had never managed to make it on his own. Jacob had clearly been living here comfortably, had organized things, cleaned things, made it more of a home than a shelter. The stew he'd made smelled incredible, and when Mary tasted it, she closed her eyes with something close to bliss. This is wonderful, she said. Secret's in the seasoning, Jacob said, pleased. My late wife taught me. A man living alone needs to know how to feed himself proper, not just exist on beans and hardtack. They ate together, and Jacob filled them in on the ranch. The cattle had weathered the storm well, protected in the valley, and supplied with the hay he'd put out for them. The house had held up fine, no damage from the wind or snow. Everything was exactly as it should be, thanks to Jacob's intervention. As the old man prepared to leave, Thomas walked him to the door, trying to find words adequate to express his gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, he started, but Jacob waved him off. You don't thank neighbors for doing what neighbors do. You just remember it when my time comes and I need the help. That's how it works out here. We take care of each other because no one else will. He paused, then added more quietly, Your bride seems like a good woman, Thomas. I see the way you look at each other. That's not what I expected from a matrimonial arrangement. Neither did I, Thomas admitted. But the storm changed things, changed us. We went through something together that forced us to be honest, to really see each other. I'm not sure we'd have gotten there any other way. Sometimes the hardest things bring the best gifts. You take care of her, you hear? And let her take care of you. That's the secret to making a marriage work. Mutual care, mutual respect. After Jacob left, Thomas and Mary stood together in the main room of the house, their house, looking around at what would be their home. It was small and simple, but it was clean and warm and solid. A place they could build a life. It's perfect, Mary said softly. It's rough, needs a lot of work. It's perfect, she repeated more firmly. Because it's ours, because we made it here together, because we survived to see it. Thomas showed her around properly. The main room with its fireplace and table, the bedroom with its simple bed, the loft where supplies were stored. He showed her the barn, still warm from the cattle's body heat, and introduced her to the animals that would be part of their livelihood. She touched each cow gently, learning their temperaments, already thinking about how to care for them. As night fell completely, they returned to the house and stood together on the porch, looking out at the snow-covered valley that was now Mary's home. What are you thinking? Thomas asked. That I was so afraid when I stepped off that train. Afraid you'd take one look at me and send me back. Afraid I wasn't strong enough for this life. Afraid I'd made a terrible mistake. And now? Now I'm still afraid. But it's a different kind of fear. I'm afraid of failing, of disappointing you, of not being able to do everything that needs doing. But I'm not afraid of being here. I'm not afraid of us. Thomas took her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. The work will be hard. There will be days when we're both exhausted, when nothing goes right, when we wonder if we can keep going. I know. There will be setbacks, bad seasons, challenges we can't predict. I know that too. But we'll face all of it together, every hardship, every victory, every ordinary day, together. Mary turned to face him fully, and in the moonlight reflected off the snow, he could see tears in her eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were something else entirely. I didn't think I could trust anyone again, she said. After my parents died, after the mill, after years of being disappointed by people and circumstances, I built walls. Told myself I didn't need anyone, that I was strong enough alone. But these past days with you taught me something. Taught me that real strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing when to lean on someone else, when to ask for help, when to admit you can't do it all by yourself. You taught me the same thing. I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to have a partner. Someone who sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stay anyway. Is that what we're doing? Choosing to stay? Yes. Every day. That's what marriage is, I think. Not the papers or the ceremony, but the daily choice to stay, to show up, to do the work of building a life together. Mary reached up and touched his face, her cold fingers gentle against his cheek. Then I choose to stay, Thomas Garrett. Today and tomorrow and all the days after that. I choose you. I choose us. I choose this hard, beautiful, terrifying life we're going to build together. Thomas covered her hand with his own, turned his face to kiss her palm. And I choose you, Mary Garrett, not because I need a hired hand or a housekeeper or someone to solve my problems, but because you're brave and honest and stubborn and real. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because somewhere in that blizzard, you stopped being a stranger and started being the person I want to face every day with. They kissed then, for the first time, a gentle meeting of lips that tasted of coffee and hope and new beginnings. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was tender and careful and full of promise. The kind of kiss that said they had time, that there was no rush, that they would learn each other slowly and thoroughly and honestly. When they pulled apart, Mary was smiling, really smiling, and Thomas felt something in his chest expand with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the house. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside. We have our whole lives to stand out here in the cold. Tonight, let's just be warm." They went inside together, and Thomas showed Mary how to bank the fire for the night, how to check the windows for drafts, all the small rituals of maintaining a house in winter. They moved around each other easily, learning the rhythm of sharing space, of being together in the ordinary moments that would make up the bulk of their lives. When it was finally time to sleep, they stood in the bedroom doorway, suddenly awkward again. "I can sleep in the main room," Thomas offered. "Give you privacy to settle in." "I don't want privacy. I want what we had in the boarding house. I want to not be alone." Mary took his hand. "We've slept beside each other for days now. Why stop tonight?" "Because this is different. This is our home. There are expectations, rules." "Whose rules? Who's watching? It's just us, Thomas. Just two people who need each other and are brave enough to admit it. If we want to share this bed, to take comfort in each other's presence, who's to say we can't?" She was right. They were alone in this. Free to make their own rules, their own choices. And if they chose to sleep side by side, to find comfort in warmth and companionship, that was their business and no one else's. They settled into bed together, and it felt like coming home. Mary curled against Thomas's side, her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart. He held her close, feeling her breathing slow and deepen as sleep claimed her. But Thomas stayed awake a while longer, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. The desperate decision to send for a bride, the disappointment on the platform, the blizzard that had trapped them together and forced them to be honest, the journey through the snow, Jacob's kindness, and now this, lying in his own bed with a woman who'd been a stranger days ago and was now the most important person in his life. The storm had changed everything. It had stripped away pretense and expectation, had forced them to see each other clearly, to decide what really mattered. And what mattered wasn't strength or capability or meeting some imagined standard. What mattered was honesty, kindness, the willingness to show up for each other even when, especially when, things got hard. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, whistling around the corners of the house. But inside, they were warm and safe and together. The cattle were fed and sheltered. The house was solid and whole. They had food and wood and each other. It wasn't perfect. The ranch was still struggling financially. There would be hard work ahead, long days, setbacks, and struggles. But they would face all of it together, two people who'd learned in the crucible of a blizzard what it meant to be partners in the truest sense. Thomas looked down at Mary, sleeping peacefully in his arms, and felt a wave of fierce protectiveness mixed with gratitude. She'd taken a chance on him, on this life, on the territory. She'd been brave enough to travel into the unknown, to face her fears, to admit when she needed help. She taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that asking for support was its own kind of strength, and he would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of that trust. Not by being perfect, but by being honest. By showing up every day and doing the work, both the physical labor of the ranch and the emotional work of the marriage. By choosing her, over and over again, in the small moments and the large ones. The wind died down, and silence settled over the valley like a blanket. Thomas closed his eyes, let himself relax into the warmth and comfort of the bed, of Mary's presence beside him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. They would have to plan for spring, figure out finances, learn to work together in the daily grind of ranch life. They would have to navigate the complications of building a real marriage from their arrangement of necessity. There would be arguments and misunderstandings, moments of frustration and doubt. But they would face it all together, and that made all the difference. As sleep finally pulled Thomas under, his last conscious thought was that sometimes the biggest storms brought the greatest gifts. The blizzard had taken 4 days of their lives, had pushed them to their limits, had nearly killed them. But it had also given them each other. Really given them each other. Not as strangers bound by a contract, but as partners bound by choice and honesty and shared survival. And that, Thomas knew as he drifted into dreams, was worth every frozen moment, every fearful night, every difficult step. The storm was over. The real journey was just beginning, and they would take it together, one day at a time, building a life from honesty and hard work, and the simple human choice to not be alone. Outside, the stars emerged in a sky scrubbed clean by the storm, brilliant and cold and beautiful. The snow reflected their light, turning the valley into a landscape of silver and shadow. And in the small house at the heart of it all, two people slept in each other's arms, survivors of the blizzard, partners in life, finding in each other something neither had known to look for but both desperately needed. Home. Not just a place but a person, a choice, a promise kept. And in the morning, when they woke to face their first full day together on the ranch, they would build into something lasting. They would remember the blizzard not as a disaster, but as the storm that showed them what really mattered. Each other. Honesty. The courage to be vulnerable. The strength to ask for help. The wisdom to know that the hardest things in life were best faced together. The wind whispered one last time around the house, then fell silent. The world slept, peaceful under its blanket of white, and inside 2 hearts beat in rhythm, learning the language of partnership, writing the first chapter of a story that would be told for years to come. The story of the blizzard bride and the rancher who nearly missed his blessing. The story of 2 people who found in desperation what they'd never found in certainty. The story of a marriage that began with disappointment and fear and became something neither could have imagined. A true partnership, a real home, a love built careful and slow, one honest moment at a time. And it all started with a storm.